Inflation is being set to plummet. Yeah, you're in this game where you're just going to try and raise rates, but you're going to create an absolutely mother of all recessions, which may turn to a deflation. So you are where you are, Stig. I think there was a mistake to actually think that this was demand driven, which it wasn't.
You're in the committee. What are you advising? What would you advise if you're in the committee?
Well, this is really complicated. And if you look back at the forecast from the last meeting, the forecast said that there's a 70% probability that inflation will be below 1 and a 20% probability that will be in deflation. And all the evidence since then suggests that we are in recession. We've had PMIs, purchasing manager indices, suggesting in recession, Europe in recession, retail sales declining. So I understand the argument to say that people should raise rates. But in these circumstances, all the data says actually you should be cutting them, especially if you think that the government's going to go in and do 50 billion pounds of spending cuts and raising taxes. So it's pretty hard to see on any basis whatsoever why you would raise rates. Think of Keynes. Would you raise rates in a recession to make the recession deeper and longer? So I think we are in a real impasse. And if they raise rates, which it looks like they're going to, the press conference tomorrow, people are going to say to them, but surely all the evidence suggests that you've got it completely wrong. And in 2 or 3 months, when the unemployment rate goes up like crazy, you're going to look foolish and you're going to go into reverse gear. So I think that's where we are. Likelihood is they're going to raise rates, and it sounds awfully like 2008. And in my view, it's a big error.
Do you think they're going to be stung slightly by the charge that they should have raised rates earlier, and therefore, the Fed has been raising rates, and so almost the moral pressure they're putting on themselves might be, well, we've got to raise rates because we were criticised for not doing it sooner?
Well, it's a bit like, well, I mean, what's gone is gone. It never made any sense to me to think actually raising rates was the right task to take anyway. What you had was a temporary shock that was basically COVID, and you had ships sitting off ports. I mean, the port of Los Angeles had an average of 108 ships sitting off that port. Today there are 4. You had a temporary shock from COVID, and that started to go away. And then you got hit by another temporary shock from the war. So in essence, the argument to say you should raise rates even then made no sense. Obviously, the Fed has done it. That's had an effect on the pound relative to the dollar. But actually, the reality is that inflation looks to have peaked. Inflation is being set to plummet. Yeah, you're in this game where you're just going to try and raise rates, but you're going to create an absolutely mother of all recessions, which may turn to a deflation. So you are where you are, Stig. I think there was a mistake to actually think that this was demand driven, which it wasn't. It was driven by 2 supply shocks. And what we're seeing around the world are prices tumbling, prices for freight, prices of wood, all sorts of things are tumbling. So no, I don't think it was a mistake. I think the mistake was raising rates. The mistake was telling people that raising rates would deal with the inflation. Had nothing to do with that. It had to do with 2 supply shocks. That's the problem.
What I'm very struck by, David, as a layperson, is that almost the only answer to inflation appears to be a recession. That you almost have to crash the economy a bit in order to kill inflation. Which,
well, I think that's completely wrong, Stig. That's actually completely wrong. So let's just think of this. So actually, it turns out, for most people, inflation is pretty hard to understand. It's not that prices are higher. So I'll give you an example. In the first year, price is 100. In the second year, it goes to 110. That's 10% inflation. Then it stays at 110. That's 0% inflation. And then it falls to 105. And that's deflation. So basically what you've got here is a shock that comes in, and it's a once-off shock. So in 1 month, let's say, inflation in fact, in the UK in April last year, inflation rose by 2.5 percentage points. But we know that in 12 months' time, there are 12 numbers. And in 12 months' time, that 2.5 percentage point drops out. It goes away. The central bank should not respond to once-off changes in inflation. So it's actually not. You're right that the response to high inflation caused by high demand is the central bank to cause a recession. What it should have done was sit there and say, well, this is just a temporary shock. And then it turned out we got hit by another one.
But they lost confidence in that, didn't they? That's exactly right, because they said blip. Blip was the post-COVID word, wasn't it? It's a blip, it's a blip, it's a blip.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden Ukraine happened.
But they got themselves right. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, and they then lost confidence in their own belief it was a blip.
Yes. So what you had was, it was clearly a blip. So if I just think a blip comes and that blip stays in the calculation for 12 months and then it drops out. But they got sideswiped by an unexpected second temporary shock by the war. Now, the only reason to raise rates, because we know in 12 months or so, and the Bank of England is forecasting it, Bank of England says in 15, 16, 17, 18 months' time, inflation is going to be 1. So why are you raising rates? The reality is that there was a temporary shock followed by another temporary shock. Unless there's another one, then they should do nothing. I mean, I have a house in Sanibel that got hit by a hurricane, and the place is closed, and prices have risen and so on. But in a year's time, everything will be back to normal, unless, God help us, there's another hurricane. The central bank should not respond to that single shock. So all the commentators have it wrong. The central bank now is raising rates, and basically they're going to create deflation in the economy, and they're going to have screaming U-turns. I mean, in a way, Stig, what's interesting is how complicated this is. And it seems that every one of them all thinks the same. They all think that raising rates is the fix to the problem. Well, you would have thought in a complicated world, there'd be 7 different views, but groupthink means they're sheep. And they're all doing the same thing, and I can guarantee you it's wrong. And I can guarantee you in the next 6 months, there'll be screeching U-turns, and they're going to have to cut rates as bad things happen. The unemployment rate rise, output falls, retail sales fall. People can't pay their mortgages. They default on their homes and firms start to close. And that's what's coming, created by errors from the central bank. And I would be voted for a rate cut today.
Are they scared of the markets? Is that another thing that's come out of the last few months? Last 2 months?
Yeah, they're scared of the markets because the markets have no confidence in them. I mean, what you've seen, the reason under Truss, what you saw was Truss undermined the Bank of England, undermined the Treasury, undermined the OBR, said, I don't trust all of those things. So then, of course, once you do that, and the story I heard was that, they had plans to really steamroller things and try and change stuff at the Bank of England. And so the very fact that you could have a prime minister coming in doing all of that stuff lowers the credibility of the UK. It means that, they call it the moron premium. So the cost of borrowing rose fundamentally. It's come back somewhat with Sunak, but markets are sitting there saying, we had never realized that an advanced country like the UK could actually do something so crazy and basically threaten and undermine its institutions. And obviously the Bank of England, they were doing quantitative tightening, then they went to quantitative easing. Now today they've done quantitative tightening and we don't know what they're going to do. So why would the markets have any confidence that they have a clue? All the members of the NPC, we haven't heard from any of them. We've just heard from the governor of the Bank of England. So markets don't trust them. Markets think, we'll wait and see what they're going to do. But you're right. Markets are on a knife edge and there is a credibility problem. And what's happened is the UK's credit ratings and outlook for their credit ratings have diminished because of the craziness we've seen over the last 2 months.
So your prediction here is there will be a rate increase, but it's a mistake.
Yes, absolutely. And I think they're going to probably, we have some words that suggest perhaps it won't be as much as some people are asking for, particularly people who are pushing the views of banks and hedge funds and others. But the reality is going to hit hard and you're going to see, I think it's only a matter of time. Is it at the next meeting or the meeting after that where they have to go into reverse gear as data starts to look horrible? How are people going to get through the winter with their huge mortgage payments, with their big energy bills, and then spending cuts coming? How are they going to do it? They're just going to close down things. Pubs are going to close, firms are going to close, they're going to lose their jobs. And if this is what the government wanted, well, good luck. This is going to be a disaster.
Well, it's great to speak to you. I wish your words could be more reassuring, but they are what they are.
I know. You arrived miserable and you left even more miserable. Right?
Well, listen, it's good to hear some an honest perspective as well. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.